Hi, I'm Cameron Bonsey. I'm the Vice President of Marketing with Coast of Maine Brands. And I'm here with Randy Lemmon, a garden guy for Houston and the Gulf Coast. And Randy, thank you very much for being here. We sponsor, or one of the sponsors of your radio show. And you've been very kind to us, tested our products. You're an important part of our brand around Houston and in Texas. So thanks for being here.
Well, you're welcome, and thanks for being a small part of Garden Line, brand new, I should say, part of Garden Line.
Yeah, so in this whole process, we haven't really been in Texas before. We started in Maine, but we're probably in half the country, a little bit more, and we are headed across the country in a significant way. And people like you are a big part of that process. I know we reached out to you a year or so ago, and you were able to try some of our products. You've been very kind in the way that you describe our products. And can you tell us just a little bit about your own experience with what Coast of Maine does and how you've been able to use the products?
Well, I can be a little more specific than that. If anybody ever has listened to me, you can go back and research anything I've ever written and said. I'm not a particularly big fan of 100% or like 90% peat moss based products unless they're infused with something like either mycorrhizal fungi, or in y'all's case, it always puts a smile on my face because it's all about, for us down here, the aeration. The aeration of any type of soil is absolutely critical on the Gulf Coast. We have more heat, we have more humidity, we have more bugs. Not that that has anything to do with aeration, but we experience extreme things that people up north do not. And so if you're going to introduce any kind of potting soil in and of itself, it has to have the ability to stay aerated pretty much for its eternity, that it's going to work with you on that. Heavily peat moss based soils either go to one extreme or the other. They either stay too wet or they cake up and compact and get crusty so much that the water, the moisture then cascades off and never penetrates. But we found that those potting soils that have peat moss, that have really gone to the next level of making sure that things stay aerated. And this is the first line of products I've ever dealt with that uses lobster shells, crab shells, mussel shells. I love because I'm a blueberry fanatic, the fact that you use dried blueberries and all the other stuff that is, native to Maine and the coast of Maine, if you will. So this was a real fun, interesting trip down a lane that I had not been down before because I have avoided endorsing heavy peat moss based soil. But this really stepped up its game on the aeration. And I did some potted plants in my own backyard with it, but I live in an area where I have lots of friends I went to college with. And so whenever I need people to do case studies for me, I just call them up on the phone. It's like, hey, Cliff, I really need you to, I'm going to bring you over about 3-4 bags of this new stuff that I need testing. I've got about, 10 plants going myself, but I need you because I know your wife likes potted plants. And then next thing you know, I've got like 3 case studies going out on there in the sprawling megalopolis of Katy, Texas, which is just, suburbia. West Houston is all that is. And every single one of them has done really well, except for, and it's not the soil's fault, it is the plant that just doesn't work well here, and that's called stock. A lot of people up north know what stock is. The fragrance is awesome, and then people move down here and they want to plant things like peonies and stock. And oh, by the way, that proves my audio is working on my computer if you hear that in the background. And it's just kind of been one of those things where nothing works on stock. That's why we don't recommend planting stock down here, but it was the only one that I saw a failure at, and it wasn't the soil's fault, it's the plant's fault, because all of a sudden it got 90 degrees and 100% humidity and they couldn't handle that at all. So I was hoping that it might, but it didn't. But just all of our annuals and perennials that we do down here, I had some seriously cool success with hibiscus. And down here we do tropicals where people up north just simply cannot year round. I can grow tropicals year round and keep them in containers and then pull them in when need to. A couple other things that really did well. We're big fans of what's called Angelonia down here, one of the ultimate like Texas tough perennials. And for that to just take off and just, look its best, tip of the hat to the Coast of Maine products. I also experimented with some tomatoes and peppers, had more success with peppers than I did with the tomatoes. For me, when I plant certain tomatoes around here, we need a little more of a girthy soil to get things started and a heavy amount of compost. Whereas if I wanted to add compost to the potting soil, it might create a moisture problem. But peppers, love it. I'm trying to remember. Oh, herbs, absolutely. I'm a closet chef, is what I like to tell people. I'll cook all the time if you give me the opportunity. And so I grow a lot of herbs. So obviously basil out here is critically important with our cooking. Have a lot of some dill going. Of course, I think anybody can grow mint in anything, but of course the mint has taken off in the test plot that I did with the Coast of Maine product.
That's awesome. And it's great to get that feedback. And it happens all the time that we have people asking us about our products. And, you know, even as we set up to sponsor your show, our company had experience with you through another company. Our sales manager, Rich Stryker, had worked with you before. And then obviously getting you the soil to try, because, you know, you were very clear that, hey, I'm not going to endorse something unless I try it, work with it, understand it, believe in it. And that's the key. The way that our company was founded was people trying our soil, understanding how it's made, and having it dramatically impact the way that they garden. So that's really cool. And then our soils, we've added a lot more soils. The soils that you're talking about are acid loving, our rose and flower, our tomato and veg. Those are what we have done across the country, because behind me, you'll see people, these kids behind me with these green bags in our lobster compost. It's a really tremendously successful product up here, and we really promote it for tomatoes and veg first. It can be used for a lot of different things, but as we expand across the country, we have to have bags that say specifically what they're for. And so that's what we've done down in Texas. We make those products that you have in Texas. We make them in a facility that we purchased in Pennsylvania in 2017. And we've done a lot of work to let them know exactly how we make our stuff. Because compost, as you mentioned, compost is the most important component in our soil. And it's a hugely important component, as you mentioned, down in Texas. Feeding the soil, water retention, breaking up clay soils. It's tremendous stuff. Is there a big compost awareness in Texas? I mean, in Maine,
Yeah, I'd say that as has always been the case in Texas, and especially Houston, we're always a couple of steps back behind some people's education on certain aspects of gardening and evolving products. When people were adding compost to the soil 30 years ago, we were kind of just getting educated about it. And we found out that animal compost wasn't, well, even though we could have it at will, wasn't doing the job. And that's when some soil scientists realized that vegetative compost was going to be the answer for that. And so leaf mold compost is a huge element nowadays that we incorporate into a lot of soils. My basic, if you're building beds, we don't use the existing soil to do, you know, full-blown vegetable beds out here. You do a 2 parts rose soil. Rose soil does not have peat moss in it, and 1 part vegetative compost, or in this case, leaf mold compost. And people succeed with that kind of blend. That's just a basic recipe per my radio show and all the advice and all the writings that I have. I have, by the way, can I throw in one thing? Your azalea, I call it azalea soil, your acid-loving soil has shown really good strides for people that have long suffered with what we call miniature gardenias. We can grow gardenias like nobody's business in our soils down here, but miniature gardenias, something is very sensitive about the root system. They need to be in their own soil. And I, in my consulting business, when I go to people's on-site consulting, people's residences, I look at miniature gardenias in the landscape bed, and they're failing, 100% failing. And I tell them to get it out of there, put it in its own soil, and use an acid-loving soil like that, and then just feed it its own azalea food, gardenia food. And everybody that's done that with soils such as your acid-loving mix has succeeded and finally got a way to get miniature gardenias working in Houston, Texas. So back to the compost thing. So yeah, I'm a huge, I know a lot, there's like myths out there. There's never such thing as too much compost. Yeah, there can be too much compost, and it can cause same problems that too much peat moss does in certain situations. So we're all about blending it. We're all about incorporating it. And compost is king. I wrote a book in the chapter. There's a chapter called The 10 Worst Things and the 10 Best Things That Have Happened to Us in Gardening Along the Gulf Coast. And number one in the 10 best things that happened, believe it or not, is compost, compost, compost.
Yeah, it's interesting because compost, you know, especially lobster compost, the pH is alkaline, and it probably averages about 7.8. It's one of the reasons that we have blended peat moss into that blend, make it easier to work with, but also pulls down the pH. So it helps us buffer and get the pH down around 6.5. So you're right, too much compost can cause certain issues. One of them can be pH. But also when you talk about peat, and how aware and how much discussion is there down there about the sustainability of peat? Is that
it's got a bad reputation for sustainability. It's
yeah.
One of what was the famous phrase down here? It's environmentally bankrupt. And the problem there is that there is a need for recycling. I get that, but because we're pulling it out of the environment and it's not growing back at that rapid of a clip, because it takes, you know, eons and eras and decades to get it back to where it was, it makes me worry about it. But I know there's some place. I'm not a peat moss expert. I just know I don't want it in my landscape beds down here because of our heat and humidity. And but I do love it in potted plant situations. Like we grow so many hanging baskets down here, and we can make hanging baskets work year round. And there's a need for the lighter texture of a peat moss element than just rose soil and hanging baskets, because sometimes if the hanging basket's not screwed in right or not attached right, the girth of that rose soil and too much water, it just starts falling down. Been there, done that. So had to learn that when I was all but 16, 17 years old with my mother. She was a gardening fanatic, turns out, and I had to pay attention to her. And one of her things was she had anywhere from 30 to 40 hanging baskets in our backyard at any given time. So guess who took them down, put them up, took them down, put them up? This guy.
That's good for you. And I will say on the peat side, we've done a lot with reducing peat in many of our mixes, and we continue to use hydrofiber and wood bark. And so we're shifting our blends over time as we learn them. So you're absolutely right. We're in the process of doing those things step by step, and we'll actually have a peatless mix next year completely. We have some peatless mixes now, but a more consumer potting peatless mix too. So the one of the things that your passion, you talked about your mother, and she was an avid gardener. Was she the one that got you hooked on gardening to begin with?
No. One of the books I wrote in the early chapter was, little did she know I was kind of paying attention, but I didn't. When I went to A&M, Texas A&M, to go to college, I went to be a veterinarian. And the 30-second reason I didn't is because, one, the head resident of the dorm I was living in was miserable, absolutely miserable. And he was a vet student at Texas A&M. And then did one of those weed out courses where they can tell you whether you can handle it or not. Yep. They gut some animals from cows to, cats dead, euthanized, whatever. And I couldn't handle it. I'm an animal lover. But eventually you might see my dog, Piper, piping in around here. She hears her name enough, she'll come in here and goes, "Were you talking about me? Were you talking about me?" So I'm an animal lover through and through, and I still sometimes wished I'd have done the vet thing, but went in, changed over to journalism, was intended to be a sports writer at that time.
Yep.
Just an Astros fan since 1972. And it was so interesting. I got out at a time in an era when they didn't want men doing sports anymore, especially white men. I get passed over for jobs. And then a gentleman at the Texas Farm Bureau hired me to do their radio and television. And I said in the interview, I said, I'm not agriculturally based. And he said something funny like, well, you don't know insurance and tires and batteries either. And every state has a farm bureau, if you know what I'm talking about. And so I just basically learned it from there, learned a little bit of the agriculture, did so well with that, the Texas A&M University, where I went to school, one of the deans, associate deans for the College of Agriculture said, we'd like for you to do that here for Texas A&M. Would you be interested? Heck yeah, go back to the mothership. I thought I'd be at that job for eternity, kind of in an associate professor position with the College of Agriculture, teaching ag journalism, and then doing all the radio and television for the College of Agriculture. And then I got requested to interview for this job 25 plus years ago to replace pretty much a legend in the industry who had pretty much created the Garden Line radio program. His name is Bill Zach, and he's a legend in radio, period, here in Houston. And he went from being a big time, he trained Dan Rather in Houston in radio that many years ago. And then he just kind of went on, and they wanted to keep him on the air somehow, some way. So he hosted the early morning farm and ranch show, which evolved into Garden Line.
Yep. That's awesome. And you also, I know there are so many questions, right? You get repeat questions, but you had come up, I was looking on your website, and you had the 5 Randyisms applied to.
Yeah, I just posted that recently, yes.
I was just looking at it. So you've got, it's never too late to do the right thing. It just doesn't matter. Stick to the schedule for 1 full year. Compost, top dressing is the only top dressing these days. And then call me for clarification, or come back to me in person for a personal appearance. So one of the things that is interesting to me too is that you do have to stick with your core. I mean, there's hundreds and thousands of plant varieties that need certain things. The compost part that you talk about, I always think about core. And if you're dealing with good soil, that's where you start, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so is there any question or several questions that are trending more? Have you seen questions change over the 25 years?
Ooh, that's a good question. You may give me a chance to rewrite something here. Yeah, I have talked about the 10 best things that have happened in the last 20 plus years, and I've talked about the 10 worst things. One of the things that I don't know that the questions come in left and right on it, but one of my least favorite things that's happening right now is biosolids being added to just about everything. So biosolids, for people who don't know, is basically just human waste. And it's I've known about biosolids from my day at Texas A&M when we were doing documentaries at just to kind of profile what's happening with these water treatment plants. Houston, El Paso, was traveling all over the state of Texas and New Mexico to get these videos. And back then the idea was, okay, let's figure out how to recycle this stuff. But what they've come to learn too, that, you have so many, you don't know what all is in that waste. The medical waste, the household chemicals, the pesticides. And so these are forever chemicals that stay in this product. And yet now, by the way, I'll back up on one thing. One of my biggest pet peeves in life is dyed mulch. Okay. Dyed mulch is becoming a real problem and has been for several years. That dyed mulch didn't exist 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And it's getting more because they're finding a way to recycle things, and they're finding a way to kind of just put paint on timber pallets, chopped up pallets. And this is not the best wood for mulching. And we need mulch down here more than some other places.
Sure.
So dyed mulch is heinous to me. That's a trend that I'm hopefully trying to change for the better. But the one thing that has now stepped in place of that is you have all these soils and compost yards that are always trying to find a way to save a buck, make an extra buck, all that kind of stuff. So they've been told by basically used car salesmen in this industry, add biosolids, that'll extend your product, and people will never know the difference. And what they're doing is adding, I would never grow vegetables, vegetable bed, any kind of agricultural crop, and anything that has biosolids in it. It's in mulches, it's in soils, and it's in compost down here. And that is the biggest trend right now that I'm trying to steer people away from. So just check the back. Always read the ingredients in the back of a bag, and we'll see about that. My other big change that I'm seeing trend wise is hopefully we're seeing an introduction of a I hate weed and feed fertilizers. All right, anything with atrazine is heinous to me too. It poisons groundwater. It negatively affects reptiles and amphibians. But more importantly, it kills trees, root systems down here. And so when I'm trying to get people away from that, well, there's a Texas A&M graduate started a fertilizer company 30 plus years ago, who is now evolving a fertilizer brand with a weed killing ability, but it is not dangerous to animals, not dangerous to groundwater, not dangerous to root systems. And that's going to be a kind of a game changer in future years. But we're just the same way we're kind of testing Coast of Maine products, we're testing those. So I'd like to think that environmentally speaking, when I first started doing Garden Line, you could never call me a manic or organic. And I'm not. I'm still not a manic organic, but I'm going to do everything I can to recommend products that are environmentally sound and not negative to the environment, like biosolids and atrazine and you name it. Oh, dyed mulch. I mean, the dye. Oh, but Randy, it's organic dye. I don't care. It's dye. It's leaching down into the soil. And oh, by the way, the minute a rainstorm hits, it looks gray. It's no longer dark. So, and then people just add more of that dyed mulch on top of that every time it turns gray. And they're just piling on the negativity.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the PFAS, I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because we get a ton of questions, and Maine itself has been well ahead of the curve in looking at the soil. They had a company that spread biosolids in several places in Maine, and there's been higher levels of PFAS in those locations, and it's caused great concern. Coast of Maine, we compost pre-consumer waste, so lobster shells, mussel shells, right, and seaweed. We do manure. We do manure, and we are not exposed to that. But that's one of the #1 questions that we get, and that we have to come up with a statement and tell people what we do. Those things, I don't think people were back in the day trying to get away with something. Maybe they were, but I know in Maine, I think they were trying to compost biosolids, thinking they were doing a good thing. And so now we're in this place where we're cracking down on all of that. And with us being pre-consumer waste, you can be assured that you're getting what we say is in the bag without a bunch of extras. So that's good stuff too. I have another question for you on jumping worms. I get a lot of questions on jumping worms. How big an issue are jumping worms in Texas?
Not.
Yeah. Okay.
No, we have we have more insects than we don't need anymore. Thank you very much. Our heat and humidity tend to lend itself to having more insects in the yard and the landscape than we ever, anybody else experiences up north. People that move down here for the first time get to experience fire ants, get to experience sod web worms, get to experience mosquitoes the size of roaches, roaches the size of small animals. And it's just the humidity and the fact that we don't freeze and kill overwintering insects very often. We've had a pretty nice time, not as many insects in the last year and a half, because we had, you'll probably saw it in the news, February of 2021, what they called the Uri freeze. And that, it got down in many parts of Houston, like 10 and below 10 degrees for many hours, something like 14, 18 hours, which is just crazy because we don't experience that but once every 40 years. We do experience freezes, but nothing like, zero. We'll get, if we get down to 25 degrees, I start panicking because then I know tropicals need to be protected. But we can handle 30, 31, 32, 29 degrees for an hour here and an hour there. Our plant life pretty much can handle that, but nothing did well except the good old standard evergreens. But we found out some rock stars, and oh, by the way, is a shameless self-promotion, but I just started working on a book. It's called Texas Tough Gardening Redo, because I did a book 6 years ago called Texas Tough Gardening, and it was before Hurricane Harvey, before we call our tax day and Memorial Day floods, and then Uri. So everything is going to be lessons we've learned from Harvey to Uri, and try to figure out what are the rock stars that came through that. And we'll learn a lot about the soils too.
Well,
in that. I'm going to write a new book based on that. So I tell you all that to say that we had a good year from, say, April of 2021 to April of 2022, where we just weren't experiencing as many insects. Guess what's happened though? It blew up in the last month because we hit 90 degrees in the 1st of May, which we didn't in 2021. And we've been really hot for a long time and very humid for a long time. And guess what happens when the insects just start proliferating down here, whether in the lawn, the landscape, just in the jungles that we have around here. So I've not heard about jumping worms, but I won't trade you that yet because I don't know the damages it causes.
no, I was just curious because we get questions about jumping worms too, and they're more in the mid-Atlantic and the Midwest, but they have come to New England. So people are concerned about those. And I'm assuming that it's really the heat, the surface of the soil. If it heats up above 104 degrees, those jumping worms stay towards the top and their larvae stay towards the top. So I bet if there is anything that happens to come in from some outside plant or whatever, it probably dies pretty quickly down there. That's probably how it gets.
But we're big proponents of cedar mulches down here and cedar, the cedar repel type products on top of natural mulches. And that's one way to just keep an abundance of insects out of your property. We make like perimeter sprays that keep them away, keep them retarded from the area.
And you also, the other thing that I liked when I was looking at, because we also, when we were looking for somebody to endorse our products in a particular area, I liked what you had written about things. I also liked your connection to local garden centers. You seem to have some deep relationship with some local garden centers. It's really nice.
Yeah, we don't send people to big box stores for a lot of reasons. I actually remember writing in one of my books, say, look, I go to my big box store all the time to get gardening products because I know what I need when I go in. I'm not going to get help at a big box store if I have a deep question like, there's jumping worms. What do you guys recommend for it? It's like Roundup. It's just, that's kind of their pat answer for everything over there, Roundup, because they're not taught. You have one person running a cash register. We're blessed. I wish we had more, but we're blessed to have, several mom and pop family owned and operated nurseries. Another two elements that we have down here that maybe not everybody has up north is the feed stores. Right? Feed stores are still one of the greatest places to go get things, and they'll special order. And it's always family owned and operated too. So they're getting the same questions. They know which products to have. And then in the Houston area, we have a group of Ace hardware stores called the Greater Houston Ace Retailer Group, and or GAHARG. And the GAHARG group, they have always carried products that are kind of very salient to my fertilization schedules and our schedules and our tip sheets. And so because of that, they're tied into a couple of different warehouses that always have these products. Well, obviously Coast of Maine is coming out of one of those warehouses, and so is an immediate tie-in to the several Ace hardware stores. They too are family owned and operated, but there are many of them, and they work together as a collective group from a marketing perspective, which is very smart nowadays in marketing in a group like that. And so we have those connections. And because we have so many Ace hardware stores and so many feed stores and so many mom and pop nurseries and garden centers, our goal is to get people to that and keep the money local. Why send it to a national franchise big box store?
Well, we agree 100%. It was how we started in Maine. We went to pretty much select garden centers. We had a limited amount of product. A fellow by the name of Carlos Quijano started the company and knocked on a lot of doors and sold 50 pallets of product the first year in 1996. And that was a long time ago as far as sales and changes in our products, but that buy local and the commitment to the local retailer who actually created our brand because of their loyalty. One of the things that we do, we're doing a lot of advertising down in Texas. We have that rebate program, and we're also, we actually select those garden centers with the co-op, and we do our social media advertising with those rebates, drawing traffic to that garden center. And then the kids that you see behind me are part or benefited from what we call our Growing Good program. And they've been able to, the key with that program is schools come, they apply to us. We set them up with a local garden center. We donate 10 cubic feet of soil to every school. We're up to about 500 schools that we've donated to. And that you hope brings more business to the local retailer, deepens the sense of community. And on top of that, they also get the feedback, the social media that the schools do. It's really a complete picture. So I want to thank you for supporting those local retailers. I also want to thank you for talking so honestly about our products and endorsing them. And I hope this becomes a long-term relationship. So thank you for being here.